our book club. Check it out. Look who's here. It's Jay.
Hello.
And our friend Sahar.
Hi. Hello, Sahar.
So I have a book to share with you. It is called Oliver Has Something to Say.
Ooh.
And it's written by Pamela Edwards. And it's illustrated by Louis Pilon.
Ooh, Lily.
Oliver, dear, would you like some more spaghetti? Asked his mom at the dinner table. Oliver opened his mouth and his big sister Margaret said, "No, he doesn't want any more. He's got sauce all over his face and noodles in his hair." Oliver closed his mouth.
Why didn't Oliver answer his mom? Do you know?
Oh,
Do you know why, Jay? Why?
Sahar, you guys, maybe because his sister Margaret answered for him. Do you think that's right, Sahar?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Maybe that's why.
"You're right," said Mom. She looked at Oliver. "Go wash your face, dear. I'll deal with your hair later." Oliver looked down at his plate. A noodle fell out of his hair and landed there. The next day, it was Oliver's birthday party. When it was time for the birthday cake, Azim's mom smiled at Oliver and asked, "How old are you today?" Oliver opened his mouth and his dad said, 4 years old. He starts pre-kindergarten tomorrow." Oliver closed his mouth and stared at the candles on his cake. Mom said, "Time to make a wish and blow out the candles, dear." Oliver opened his mouth and Margaret blew them out.
If somebody blew out your birthday cake candles.
I'll be sad
Yeah? Why would you be sad?
because somebody blew my candles.
And you'd like to blow them out yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, because it would be your birthday, right?
And how about you, Jay? How would you feel? Would you feel sad too?
Yeah, I would feel sad too. Yeah. But then I would probably be happy because I know that I would get to eat icing afterwards.
It's true. Birthday cake icing is delicious, right? Mm-hmm.
Oliver closed his mouth and his friend Paul yelled, "What did you wish for, Ollie?" Oliver opened his mouth and Mom said, "He wished for a train set. Oliver just loves trains." Close your mouth, dear. When the party was over, Oliver stood by the door as the guests left. He heard Paul's mom whisper to Azim's mom, "I wonder why Oliver doesn't say anything. He should be able to talk. Do you think he's shy?" Azim's mom looked toward Oliver and said, "Yes, I think he is." Oliver opened his mouth and Paul's mom shut the door. He closed his mouth and opened the door. Oliver opened his mouth and Margaret yelled from behind him, "You forgot your goodie bags!" She pushed Oliver out of the way and ran outside. Oliver closed his mouth. Then he shut the door and locked it.
How do you think Oliver is feeling?
I'm not very happy.
Not very happy, maybe a bit upset. Yeah. He never gets to say anything.
Poor Oliver.
And I think it's because he's shy, but I think it's actually because everybody is speaking for him, right?
Later, when Oliver was in the bath, his dad said, "Margaret and I will walk you to school tomorrow instead of Paul and his mom. Would you like that?" Oliver opened his mouth and Mom said, "Yes, that's a great idea." Oliver closed his mouth, shook his head, and stood up. "You can't get out yet," said Dad. "I have to wash your hair." Oliver opened his mouth and his dad poured water over his head. He sat down and spit out the water. The next morning, it was Oliver's first day of pre-kindergarten. Dad and Margaret walked him to school. Oliver was wearing his t-shirt with a red engine on the front. On the way, they met Jasmine, her dad, and their dog Brutus. "Hi, Oliver," said Jasmine. "Would you like to pet Brutus?" Oliver opened his mouth and Margaret said, "Oliver's afraid of dogs." Oliver closed his mouth and put his hand out to Brutus. Brutus wagged his tail. Oliver opened his mouth and Brutus licked his lips shut. "Yuck," said Margaret.
Do you think Oliver is afraid of dogs?
No,
No? Why do you think that?
because
Because he held out his hand to the dog?
yeah.
Yeah. And he seemed to enjoy, he looks pretty happy in the picture. He seems to enjoy that Brutus has licked him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think the dog liked Oliver?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because he licked him back.
Yeah, I think so.
When he got to school, Oliver met his teacher, Mrs. Samra. "Welcome, Oliver," she said. "I like your train shirt. There's a seat for you between Paul and Azim." Oliver looked around. Mrs. Samra said, "Let's choose an activity." Paul chose the blocks and Azim went to the sandbox. Mrs. Samra looked at Oliver. "What would you like to do?" Oliver opened his mouth and waited. But there was no sound. The words were inside, but they were used to
Staying there. Oliver closed his mouth. Mrs. Samra looked at his t-shirt and asked,
"Would you like to play with our train set?" Oliver opened his mouth and still nothing. No Margaret, no Mom, no Dad to take over. Mrs. Samra said, "So, you don't want to play with our train set?"
Why doesn't Oliver answer?
Because his words are inside.
Yeah, his words are inside.
Yeah, they are because everyone always answers for him. Isn't that right?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, and they're not there to answer for him, so he's not used to speaking up.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what to say.
Okay.
Oliver opened his mouth and finally the words tumbled out. "I really want to play with the trucks instead." "Well done," said Mrs. Samra. "I like a student who isn't afraid to speak up."
Yay! Yay, Oliver!
Speaking. It's exciting.
He spoke up.
Oliver was very tired after his first day of school, so he was put to bed early. Later in the middle of the night, there was a noise downstairs. Dad tiptoed down slowly with Mom and Margaret creeping behind. They saw light coming from the open refrigerator door in the kitchen. In the middle of the floor sat Oliver with a bowl of spaghetti. There was sauce on his face and noodles in his hair. Mom opened her mouth and Oliver said, "I did want more Getty." Mom closed her mouth and stared at Dad. Dad opened his mouth and Oliver said, "And I want to walk to school with Paul and his mom." Dad closed his mouth and stared at Margaret. Margaret opened her mouth and Oliver said, "And I'm not afraid of dogs. I love dogs." Margaret closed her mouth and stared at her little brother.
Did Oliver find his voice?
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, good for Oliver.
Good job.
Oliver looked up at them. "And I didn't wish for a train set. I wished for a dog. Dogs don't talk, they listen." He ate some more, then asked, "Want some Getty?" Dad, Mom, and Margaret opened their mouths, but nothing came out.
Because he was talking so much.
Yeah, because Oliver was speaking so much, they were all in awe and shock.
So Oliver opened up and kept on talking. "Oh, and one more thing, Margaret."
Do you think he'll ever stop talking?
No.
I hope not.
Yeah, the end. Did you like the story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.
Me too. Anyway, thanks for coming, guys, to my Big Backyard Book Club. Every day, you've got the need. Every day, you've got to read. Bye.
Bye. See ya.
Oliver Has Something to Say was written by Pamela Edwards and illustrated by Louis Pilon, published by Lobster Press. To join my Big Backyard Book Club, log on to tvokids.com and click on the Big Backyard button.